You need to pull that closer to your mouth.
Oh, no, you don't want it closer. I can talk without it. I hate the microphone. Where do we start? My name's Carol Womack. If you don't know me, I was here a couple weeks ago with my class from East High. Kayla is a former student of mine, and she contacted me a little while back about coming to speak with you guys tonight. It's kind of hard to know where to start when you're supposed to be talking about yourself. It's not it's not something I'm used to doing. I first met God in February of 1992. And I was going to church with a guy that I had met and was going out with. And I passed out one day in church during the altar call. And people woke me up, and I was really embarrassed because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And I got home that night and I couldn't sleep. And ended up waking up and basically praying and asking God to save me. But I didn't know that's what I'd done. And I called the preacher the next morning and said, I need to come talk to you. And he's like, well, okay, what do you want to talk to me about? And I was like, well, God, what else do you talk to a preacher about? But anyway, went and talked to him and got baptized. And life was really great. I can remember seeing some older ladies in the church, and they were just always like, oh, she's just full of the Spirit. She's just got the peace that passes understanding. And I'm like, what is that? I don't, because when you're a young Christian, you don't know what that is. You're kind of like, how do you get that? Yeah. And nobody can tell you because it just happens. I met my first husband, David, and we got married in February of 1992, or 93, sorry. Yeah. And I was in school doing my internship at Gardner-Webb at the time. We met, we got married, I got pregnant on my honeymoon, which was kind of crazy because the doctors were always like, you'll never be able to get pregnant. I'm diabetic, and they were like, you won't ever be able to get pregnant because your sugar's crazy and we can't ever get it stabilized. And was supposed to have a baby at Christmas. And he decided to come 2 months early. And we went to the hospital. I woke up that morning and David was like, what are you going to do today? I said, I think I'm going to go to the hospital. I had to sit with his mom most of the time I was pregnant because I was passing out. If you've been pregnant, they give you a test to see if you're a gestational diabetic. Test your sugar. Well, they tested me even though I was already a diabetic and on insulin. And they put me on the diet they would have put you on to keep you from having to take insulin. But I was already on insulin, so they cut my food in half and tripled my insulin, and then they wondered why I was passing out. And I wasn't conscious enough to tell them. But and David was like, what do you mean? I said, well, I think my water broke in the middle of the night because I woke up and thought, what is going on here? And had 2 contractions. And David was an electrician. He had wired a grocery store that was opening that next morning. And I was like, okay, I'll just lean back, and the next one, I'll wake him up. I'll wait for the third one, and I'll wake him up. And I fell asleep. So when we got up that morning, I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to go to the hospital. So we go to the hospital, and he's got his walkie-talkie talking to people at work. And then he starts telling them what the doctors are doing to me. And I'm like, listen, you're going to have to get rid of that, and you're going to have to focus here. But when Matthew was born, the fire alarm in the hospital went off. And I knew then we were going to be in trouble because that child was never still, not even in his sleep. I was on the ground and running every day. Then in February of 2001, it was the 13th, and that was mine and David's anniversary. We were sitting down eating dinner that night, and I was really quiet. I wasn't saying a word. And David's he'd been really busy. He had started his own company and was busy and out of town a lot working. And he was like, what is wrong with you? Why are you so quiet? And Matthew looked at him and said, Daddy, if you just tell her happy anniversary, she wouldn't be mad. He's like, is that our anniversary? And I was like, yeah. And, I was kind of upset because he hadn't really noticed. He hadn't noticed Thanksgiving. I mean, he hadn't really been involved with Thanksgiving and Christmas before that. And that was just kind of odd for him. But, you look back and you think, I should have known something was wrong. His grandmother died, and all the grandsons were going to be pallbearers. And they were like, we're going to wear navy suits. And so he's like, I don't have a navy suit. Let's go look for a navy suit. And we're in the store, and he's stumbling around and just not acting right. And I was like, we've got to go to the doctor. We went to the doctor, and the doctor told him that he was depressed and gave him some medicine. It was very high. The dose was very high. It could have killed him. I was like, don't take that. You don't need that. And about a week later, I took him back to the doctor. And I had left Matthew at his mom and dad's house. And right when the triage nurse was calling us back, his dad walked in the ER and went back with us. And David had been in the Marines before I had ever met him. And he had a mole removed from his side. And it was cancerous. And the doctors had come in at one point and had told him that he had like 3 months to live. And then he'd come in the next day and they were like, oh, we're sorry, we looked at the wrong chart. Yeah. His mom's like, no, I think they looked at the right chart. I think God just took it away right then. But we found out that he had a brain tumor about the size of an orange. And she said like 5 millimeters. I was like, what does that mean? She said like the size of an orange. I was like, okay, so what are we going to do? And they're like, they're sending an ambulance right now to take you to Charlotte. And I was like, well, I've got to go home first. I've got to get some clothes and medicine and things. And they were like, no, you can't do that. And so my father-in-law said, go outside and call Pat, his wife, and tell her what you need. And see if your mom will come over and get Matthew, and I'll go home and get her, and we'll meet you at the hospital. So I had to go out in the parking lot and call my husband's mom and tell her that her son had a brain tumor. And call my mom and tell her to go get Matthew and get some clothes for him, and that was just crazy. So we were in the hospital in Charlotte. We were told that the tumor was somewhere they'd never seen it. It was right in the very middle of his brain, not on the left or the right hemisphere, not on the top or the bottom, right in the middle where all the nerves crossed and intertwined, where everything was run. And they were like, we've never seen one there. I don't know if we'll be able to get a whole lot. We're not sure about this. We're like, okay. They were like, okay, we'll come out. The doctor will come out and let you know. He'll call and let you know what's going on. They'll tell you at the waiting room desk. And so I had students that checked out of school and came down there to Charlotte. And David's family's huge, so we had to have our own waiting room because we couldn't fit in there with everybody else. And I kept going to the nurse and saying, they were supposed to call and let me know what's going on. What is going on? And she finally said, oh, the doctor said that they're finished. They're putting him in the ICU and he's going to come talk to you. And I was like, okay, we'd been there for hours. And the doctor came in and he's like, the Lael family, and like the whole room stood up. And he was like, just the closest people, And so we all just walked down the hall with him. What are you going to do? I'm not going to tell his family they can't come out with us. But the doctor was, he was a little Italian man. And he was a really smart man. We had talked to him, before the surgery, and I was really impressed with him. But he's like, I just don't understand. And he just kept looking at his hands, and he was just really confused. And he's like, I just don't understand. We told you where it was. And I was like, yeah. How did it go? And he's like, but we went in there, and we got everything except microcellular fibers, which are just little bitty slivers. They were able to get everything, but just some little slivers. He's like, I just don't understand. And I said, well, there were hands in there before yours ever got there. You just don't understand. And he was just like, I thought, okay, this doctor might need to be talked to a little bit. But David came home. He was on a lot of steroids for a while, and they started weaning him off. And the doctors were like, if you notice anything, make sure to let us know, because, sometimes we might decrease his medicine too much. And if we do that, he might act a little bit like he did before he had the surgery. We might need to not decrease it as fast. So, okay. I lost pretty much every drinking glass in my house before the surgery because he would reach for something and he couldn't tell. His spatial relations were off, and he had knocked glasses off the counter because he couldn't tell if he was grabbing them or not. And he kind of started acting like that again. So I called the doctor, and they're like, okay, well, we did do a bigger decrease in the medicine this time. We'll bump it back up, do this for the next 4 days, and then try this. And we went back in April, the end of April, for his last PET scan. Now, they didn't do chemotherapy because chemotherapy can't cross the blood-brain barrier. I didn't know that. But they did radiation. And when we went back to the regular oncologist. And he's like, comes in, with the scan, and he's like, well, I've got good news and I've got bad news. And we were like, okay, let's have the good news. And he said, well, the original tumor's gone. We were like, oh, thank you, Jesus. And then we were like, what's the bad news? And he's like, well, there's something that showed up on the scan, but it's near the edge. And I kind of think that maybe the technician had his finger too close to the camera, and that's the part of his finger. I want you to go back and see the surgeon again just to see what he thinks. And we're like, okay, sounds good to me. And we had to drive over to because in Charlotte, everything's in a different building. So we had to drive over to the surgeon's building, and then they had to work us in, and I had to leave there and go back to the hospital and go to the medical records department and check out his x-rays. They let me go pick them up, and I was like, this is not good, because I'm going to look at them. Even though I can't read them. Take them back, and I'm sitting in the waiting room looking at him, and his dad's like, don't do that, you're going to mess him up. I'm like, they look at him like this all the time. I don't know. But we go in to see the surgeon, and he comes walking in, and David's sitting up on the little bed they have in the rooms, and I'm sitting up there with him, and all of a sudden it was like I was above us. I could see stuff going on from above us. And the doctor says, well, you had surgery. You've already done all the maximum amount of radiation you can do. Chemotherapy won't work. You've already been told you're terminal, so I'm not sure why you're here. The oncologist wrote in the chart in March that he told us David was terminal, but never bothered to actually tell us. I had a lot of problems with that for a long time, because if you're going to be an oncologist, you have to be prepared to have a conversation with people that they're not going to live. Unfortunately, you have to have those conversations. But, and David was just a little kind of, little out of it that day. And so his dad said, well, why don't you and your mom go on out to the car? We'll be out there in a minute. And we kind of stayed and talked to the doctor. And he's like, what are you talking about? And the doctor started reading the thing. He's like, doctor, we've never been told this. And that doctor was white as a ghost. He was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But he gave us a personal cell phone. If you need any medications, you call me. There's a new medication. If you want to try it, you call. We'll get it for you. We went home, and we decided to have a birthday party for David outside. The whole family came. The whole family knew that he had been diagnosed as terminal, but Matthew didn't know yet. So when we would go to family dinners, because they were all inviting us over for family dinners every day, I was having to run around and tell all the kids, don't say anything to Matthew. And I finally told David, I said, because when we talked about it, I was like, well, your dad doesn't want to discuss it. He thinks that if you don't talk about it, it's going to go away. But, I want you to fight this. And, we have a medicine we can try if you want to try it. And he's like, yeah, I want to try it. And we had to tell Matthew. Now, when David first went in the hospital, little kids, when they're 7 years old, they don't understand what cancer means. So it was, well, Matthew, Daddy's got something in his head. It's called cancer. It's kind of like having a rock. Are you supposed to have rocks in your head? Well, no. So, yeah, the doctor's going to have to operate and take it off, to get it out. So that was enough for him at the time. But he got out of the shower one night and came in there, and David had told me, I'm going to talk to him when he gets out of the shower tonight. I was like, okay. And Matthew sat down, and he was like, sat down on his lap, and he's like, I got to tell you some things, son. And he's like, what do you want to tell me, Daddy? He couldn't do it. So I had to talk to him about, sometimes when people are sick, God can make them better here for a little while until he takes them home to heaven. And sometimes he decides to take them home to heaven early. And we didn't know what was going to happen, but God could either make Daddy all better here, or he could take him to heaven to make him better. Oh, well, that's cool. How long does he have to stay in heaven? So we had to talk about, when God takes you to heaven, he makes you white. He takes off all your sins and makes you white as snow, and you can't come back here because you'll be too dirty again. And at the time, it seemed like it stuck. Kids are pretty resilient. But David died 3.5 weeks after we found out he was terminal. We were at the house, and Matthew was there, and I sent him outside to check on David's parents right as David was taking his last breath, because I was like, I don't think he can, and he wanted to come back inside and see him later. And so he did, and he's like, well, Mama, God gave Daddy a new body. He can walk real good now, can he? And I was like, yes, man, he can do that, And he's like, okay. Went up to his grandparents' house. They had a pool. It was kind of overcast that day. I had to sit and wait for the funeral home to come and pick David up. And when they brought Matthew back that night, they were like, he was in the pool, and the sun came out, and he's like, look, Daddy's already working. David had been an electrician, and the sun came back out. So only children can say things like that and rationalize things like that. But David's death affected Matthew throughout his whole life. He was definitely Daddy's little man, and every year on David's birthday, he would go to the grave. We would go and release balloons on David's birthday, which is today, and on Father's Day. So when Matthew first died, we took balloons for that. But we lost David's dad 5 years and 2 months after he died. I knew what day it was going to be, and David's mom knew what time it was going to be. David and his dad both died at 3:04 p.m. Then we lost my dad the day before my husband Rob and I got married. I got a call from my sister in New Jersey, and she said, come on up, Dad's up here, he's visiting, and he's in the hospital. And my dad had been on dialysis. He had also had several heart bypass surgeries, and she's like, they said they can't do dialysis anymore, it'll make his heart explode. You need to get up here. And I was like, okay. So I'm in New Jersey visiting my dad. Rob takes his vacation and drives up there to be with us. And I'm trying to coordinate everything for, we're going to have to postpone this. I don't know when. I'll call you back. A little stressful. But Rob and I were able to buy our rings up there and spend time with my dad. So that was a very, very special time. My older sister and I would take turns staying at the hospital. Cheryl and I would stay one night, and then Cheryl and my little brother would stay the next night. And the night that Daddy died, or the night before, I had been there with him, and he had been squeezing our hands throughout the night, and he stopped squeezing. And I was like, oh, this is not going to be good. And Cheryl that evening made me go, we had gone to get something to eat and came back, and she said, you're going to go in there and you're going to tell Daddy bye. And I was like, no. She's like, you're going to go tell him bye, and you're going to go to Steve's house, my other brother, and you're going to get some rest. And so I went in there to talk to my dad. I was also I'm the third child, but I was the one that had to talk to him about the dialysis, that Daddy, they're afraid if you do dialysis, it's going to kill you. And he's like, well, I'd rather just spend time with the family and go to sleep, because his kidneys would eventually shut down. So I went in there to talk to my daddy, who had been unresponsive for almost 24 hours, and held his hand, and he squeezed my hand the whole time I was talking to him. That was God's way of letting him say goodbye. Just like when David died, he looked at me and he knew me. The hospice nurses will tell you that people start not recognizing familiar voices and familiar faces as the end gets closer. I don't believe that. I've been around too many people that have been in hospice. They can still know who you are. So we lost David. We lost David's dad. We lost my dad. Right after Rob and I got married, I found a lump. The doctors told me that they were going to do a mastectomy and not even going to find out if it was cancer or not. And I was like, wait a minute. Got my family doctor to refer me to Spartanburg. I went and I found out that I have fibrocystic disease, so I can't have a lot of caffeine. Shh, I have caffeine anyway. It's okay. I can't be at school and not have some caffeine. But, so that was okay. But then the Easter after Rob and I got married, and see, Rob and I missed getting married when we were supposed to, but I'd already changed my name at the county office, so we had to get married before school started back, or else I wouldn't get paid. So when I came back after everything with my dad, and the morning that my dad died was the morning Rob had to leave to come back. Yeah, so I was alone on what would have been my wedding day in New Jersey, and the only person I really was that close to was my younger brother. But it was good times for the family. We got to spend a lot of time with each other, and I got to meet a lot of people that had known my dad before I was ever in the picture. So that was kind of cool. But at Easter, right after we had gotten married in July, my grandmother was in the hospital. My grandmother helped raise me. That was probably the reason I'm kind of sane today. And Rob went into the hospital with a pulmonary embolism, which is blood clot in your lung. Most of the time that's fatal. They're doing all kinds of tests on him. I'm here with him and my grandmother's here, and I'm like, where do I go? And my mom had Matthew with her, with my grandmother. They did all kinds of tests on Rob, nothing, not the usual causes. And they were like, okay, we're going to do some more tests. It's probably some weird kind of arthritis you never hear about, because that's usually what it is. No. For the first 2, I think it was 3. Rob says it's 2. I think it's the first 3 Easters we were married. He would get a pulmonary embolism. Just at Easter, just like clockwork. And then for a couple of years after that, he would get the pains. And it's like, okay, do we need to go back to the hospital? So Easter's kind of a catchy situation sometimes. And he hadn't had it for a while. And then a couple of years ago, maybe about 4 years ago, he started having those pains again, but there was nothing there. So we're good. But my grandmother ended up dying. And my mom and her sister were out in the hall having a discussion, and Matthew was in there with her by himself when she died. Yeah. So, 8 years old. Matthew wouldn't go to funerals after that, and I don't blame him. Had a hard time with that. Hard time with that. He questioned a lot of things after that. But it also made him question a lot about God and learn a lot more about God than I think he would have if all of this hadn't happened in his life. Let's see. Then everything was fine for a few years, and Carol finally feels like she's back in the land of the living. And then on May 15th of 2013, I was getting up. I was 5:15. I was getting in the shower and the doorbell rang, and I thought one of those boys has been out somewhere and left their keys. And then I thought, well, how could they have driven home if they didn't have their keys? And Rob comes and he says, hey, you're going to need to get out of the shower. There's 2 troopers here. And I was like, well, what's going on? He said, I don't know. One of the boys, you've got to get out of the shower. We need to go find out what's going on. So I get out and I'm trying to find clothes and grab my glasses and, get out there just to see what's going on. And we have 2 dogs, and we were like, let's get them out the back door so we can get the troopers in here. And they come in and they say, you need to sit down. And I'm like, no, because every movie you watch, they tell you to sit down and something bad's coming. And I was like, no, I'm not going to sit down. And they told us that Matthew and his friend had been in a crash, a single car crash. The car had flipped at least 5 times, and Matthew had been killed instantly, and his friend had been flown to Spartanburg. And that's when time stopped. I'm really good at putting on a face. I've learned throughout the years how to put on a face and look normal and appear that everything's okay. This year has been really hard because today is actually the day that Matthew would have graduated from college, from UNCC. All of his friends graduated this morning. I've been looking at pictures on Facebook all day. And really happy for him, but it really tears my heart apart because he should be there too. We asked, Rob went out on the porch with one of the troopers, and he asked about people to call, and I was like, well, you need to call my boss. I can't go to work. You need to call Matthew's boss, because I think he was supposed to go work at the pool today because he was a lifeguard at Forest City. That was his 3rd or 4th, I don't even remember, 3rd or 4th year working there. And the lady at the rec center is cousins with my boss, or actually that's his aunt, and then her son was Matthew's best friend, not the one in the car crash with him. But Rob had walked out with one of the troopers, and he's like, well, do you think there was alcohol involved? If something happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, 2 o'clock in the morning, wait a minute, where's my child? Because it's 5:15. Why are you just getting here? Learn a lot about how rescue works and EMS and everything else when things like this happen, because the 2 troopers were the only policemen that were working the case. They had to go through all of the taking pictures at the scene and measurements and everything else. And there's crew working on Matthew's friend, and there was a crew in charge of my child. And actually the girl that was in charge of transporting Matthew was one of my former students. And she came back to the house after she took Matthew to the hospital. She came to my house and sat with me until somebody from our church came to drive us to the hospital, because I wanted to go right then. And the officers were like, no, you can't go yet. You need to wait until somebody can drive you. And I was like, no, I need to go see him, because I was thinking, this is a joke. I don't know how well you knew Matthew when you were at school, but Matthew was a prankster. Like, it was all the time pulling things over on Mom. So when they're telling me all this, I'm just expecting him to run in and go, I finally got you. Finally got you. And I was like, until I see him, it's not real. It's not real. And so Amanda came back and talked to me, and she said, Miss Womack, I was the first one to him. She wasn't the first one on the scene, but she was the first one to him who had to be responsible for him. And she said, I walked up and I saw his tattoo, and I knew it was him. I just knew. And because Matthew had a cross tattoo on his back for his daddy with his initials and the day he was born and the day he died. And so she kind of talked to me a little bit, and she's like, I'll be glad to come back later if you want me to. I can give you some details if you want them. I don't know if you want them now or later. And I was like, come back later. And we went to the hospital. I called my brother on the way, although I don't remember calling him. Clueless about that. He lives in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about 6.5 hours away. Called him. And then I was waiting, because I didn't want to call my mom until I was at the hospital. I didn't want her, because I knew she would come. My mom and I are not that close, but I was like, I want to be there with him. I don't want anybody else there with him. I want to be there with him. I had to call David's mom. I tried to call Matthew's cousin first, because I thought, Erica will be a little more equipped to deal with this. She's a nurse. She'll be a little bit better at going over to Pat's house and talking to her and calming her down. And Erica's phone I didn't get through to her. So I had to call Pat. And I told her, I was like, you need to get off the phone, you need to call Erica, and you need to get her over to the house. I'll call you back later. We're at the hospital. And then I called my mom. My sister from New Jersey had called in at one point and was just like, what is going on? I'm like, how did you know? She's like, John called me. I was like, I haven't talked to John this morning. And she's like, he said you called this morning. Yeah. So we went in to see my child, and the nurse at the little desk where you check in the emergency room, still don't know the lady's name. I've tried. I have friends that work at the hospital. I've been like, you've got to find out this lady's name. I need to go back and talk to her. She came over and she said, I've been praying for you since they brought your baby in. And I just want to tell you this. You pray and ask God for 1 second. And then you pray and ask Him for another second until you can get through 10 seconds. And then you ask Him for half a minute. And then you ask Him for a minute and an hour and a day. That was the best advice I was given throughout that whole thing. The whole thing. But we went to see him, and it was him. But poor little thing, they had him covered up to here with a little thing that looked like a blue shag carpet. That was horrible. I was like, you guys have got to get some blankets in here. This is horrible for a parent to see their child covered up with something that looks like carpet. And then they had something on his head that looked like white shag carpet. So all we could see was his face, and I saw gouges in his forehead, this way. I saw green under his eye, like he'd been hit. He looked like he'd been in a fight and won. There were 2 little scratches here that looked like they'd started to heal, but not scabbed over yet. They weren't bad. There were a couple drops of blood, but that was from up on his head. He had a place up here that I didn't really look at. I didn't really notice. But, and he had a big knot on his lip. And I was just like, okay, get up. I mean, what is going on here? He's not dead. Do something, wake him up. That was a hard morning. I wanted his clothes. I wanted everything he had. They threw his clothes away because they had blood on them. I wouldn't have cared. I don't care. That was his blood. I wanted his sweatshirt, his football hoodie he had, and he had it on because I've seen pictures of the crash site. I had to see that at the trial. No blood on it, but it was thrown away at the scene. Yeah, it was that's a bad experience for anybody to have to go through. And I have met several ladies throughout since this happened. I go to a grief group at Chase Baptist. We go once a month, and it's for people that have lost children. And I have met a lot of ladies, and I've met a lot of ladies online that have lost their children. And it's just unbelievable the things that people say to you and the way you get treated when your child dies. And I'm not saying anything bad, because we had a lot of people praying for us, sending us cards, calling, bringing food, wonderful things. But people don't know what to say. And sometimes they say things that they think are good to say. And they sound like really godly things to say. But if you've lost your baby, you don't want to hear things like that. Like, he fulfilled his purpose. I actually yelled at somebody at a visitation. Oops. And was like, his purpose was not to fly 180 feet through the air when he was thrown out of that car. Matthew died before he left that car, but he was thrown out of the sunroof 180 feet, 2.5 basketball courts. And that sounds like a good thing to say. And it might be a good thing to say if it's somebody that's lived their entire life. But you can't say that to somebody whose child is barely out of high school. There's a way we need to learn how to speak to people that have lost children. And I'm not saying that losing anybody else is less. It's not, but it's a different loss. It's not normal. Your grandparents are supposed to die before you. Your parents are supposed to die before you. Your child is never supposed to die before you. And throughout this whole thing, God has been saying, you need to rethink how I work because God doesn't have bad plans for us. God didn't plan for Matthew to be killed so young. God didn't plan for little babies to get beaten to death by their parents or to get kidnapped and tortured and killed by some crazy person. God's plans for us are good. And I had words with several people about that because God's plans for us are good. Matthew was in the wrong place. Matthew made poor decisions that night. He was drinking. He was 19 years old. He shouldn't have been doing that. His friend was 20. He shouldn't have been doing that. His friend was on at least 3 Oxycontin pills that night. He shouldn't have been doing that. They didn't have their seatbelts on. However, they were at the ball game at school. There was a state playoff game. They left there. They went to the cemetery because it was David's birthday. And Matthew always visited the cemetery on his daddy's birthday. He sat out there and had a conversation with his dad, and they left and they came into Forest City. There was a license check at Collins Metal that's not even a mile from my house that they went through coming into Forest City. They went somewhere. We were questioned by the police. We were questioned very strongly by the police about what kind of alcohol we kept in the house. If we let Matthew drink, didn't we hear him come home that night? I was like, I have 2 dogs. If he had come in the house that night, we would have been up. He didn't come in my house. They went somewhere. They came back through the exact same license check at 147 and came through and turned up Bostic Sunshine Highway, and the first call came into EMS at 2:04. That's changed because the police have been trained on how to do license checks now. I'm really hoping that it stays changed because there's a big problem in this county and in every county all over the country. There's a problem with underage drinking, underage use of pills, prescription and illegal, use of drugs. It's getting a lot worse, and it's going to get worse, I think, as the days go on. People are hopeless. They are lost and they are hopeless, and they don't know the answer. Just like when I was seeking that answer for what is peace that passes all understanding, they're seeking the answer to the question they don't even know what they're asking. And until they can find that answer, it's not going to get any better. And especially with the things that are going on in the world today. It's going to get, I think, a lot worse before it ever gets any better. I am now a certified victim advocate through Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I'm the local Mothers Against Drunk Driving representative for this in Polk County or McDowell County. And I get notifications on Facebook every day, and you would not believe the things that I've seen, that I've heard about. It's sad. And these kids are, instead of learning how to deal with their problems, they're using alcohol and pills to cover them up, which is just making it worse because it becomes a habit, it becomes a ritual, and then this happens. We went through a trial. I won't say much about that except nothing happened. There were 3 jury members that slept every day. The prosecutor was taking money from the defense attorney for campaign contributions, which is legal, but really shouldn't happen when that's going on. There were people that were laughing and making jokes when they showed pictures of my child's body during the trial. I almost went to jail a few times that day. Rob had to keep me in my seat. People just have a lack of respect, and they don't want to be accountable for their actions. And you know, right after Matthew died, David and I, or Rob and I, bad mistake. Rob and I were talking about this, and you know, it was like we were at the insurance office because we were told that morning that Matthew was the passenger. But then the newspaper started reporting they didn't know who the driver was. Newspaper is a very biased thing sometimes. Things are not always reported fairly. And, I'll be the first to tell you, Matthew made a mistake. He was drinking, but that's all he did that night. He didn't get behind the wheel of that car, but he got into the car with somebody that was drinking. And we have kids today that aren't drinking, but they're getting into the car with people that are drinking. The young man, Andrew Head, that died maybe 5 years before Matthew, he was at RS, was a passenger in the car. Hadn't been drinking at all, and he's the one that died. It happens each and every day. And it's just sad that there are families that are torn apart and their lives are never going to be the same because of decisions that people make. And, Matthew, if he had been the one to survive, he would have said, if that was my car, I was driving it. Please forgive me. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. It would have taken everything that I had to keep him here and not kill himself. If he had hurt somebody bad enough to kill him, and there is no amount of money that I could have paid to counsel him to make him be the child he was before this happened, if he had lived. So in a way, we kind of got the good end of the deal. We know where he is. I sound crazy saying that, don't I? Because you know what? If I could bring him back, I would. Please, Jesus, let him come back, because I was a wheeler and dealer the night that he died. I was begging God to bring him back and send me to hell. I will gladly go if you'll just bring him back. Just bring him back, because he's too young. But sometimes God's answers are not our answers. And I'll never get the whys for this. I'll never get an apology for this. And by the time I get to heaven and God's going to show me what the answers are, I won't care. Won't care at all. It won't matter, because I'll be with Matthew again. There's times in our group that some of the parents will say, well, do you think God knows that I want to see my baby more than I want to see him? And I'm like, yeah. I'm sure he does. I already told him he better come get me. He better have Matthew come get me. Or Matthew can come with him. I don't care, but I better be able to see Matthew. We're all selfish in our own little ways. But when David was sick and when he first died, I kept a journal, and it turned into a book. And I've never done anything with it. I just have it. And I started writing another one when Matthew died, and I've not been able to do much with that. But when I was writing in my journal when David was sick and when he died, I could feel God's hands on me. It was tangible. But with Matthew, it's not been. It's not been. I'll be honest with you, I am not as close to God as I should be. Not like I was when David died. But when David died, he had been sick, and I could see him getting worse and getting worse and getting worse. And with Matthew, it just makes absolutely no sense. But I'll tell you this, when I found out I was diabetic, I was 12. Yeah, it's bad when you can't remember that because you're getting really old. I was 12, and the doctors were always like, oh, you won't live long. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm not going to live past 19. That was what my mind thought when I was 12. And then 19 came and went, and then I had the number 36. About 4 days after David died, I was in the kitchen drinking some water, and I kept thinking about that 36, and God said maybe that number wasn't for you, because David had just turned 36 about 2 weeks before he died. About 2 weeks after Matthew died, and when David died, my mind rationalized it like, this happened now to prevent something worse from happening later on. Do I know if that's true? No, I don't, but that's how my mind dealt with it. Your mind works in funny ways when things happen. But about 2 weeks after Matthew died, I was in the shower, and I was just laying down in the shower crying. And I thought about my brain doing that, and it was like, oh my gosh, because David couldn't have stood this. It would have killed him. And then I thought to myself, but if David hadn't died, this might not have happened. And then I remembered that when I had that thought in my head about 19. knew. I just didn't know what I knew, but I knew. David died June the 2nd, 2001 at 3:04. His dad died August the 2nd, 2006 at 3:04. So October the 2nd, 2011, Matthew was a junior. Oh no, I'm sorry, he was a senior. He was a senior. And I said, just please go home today. Just go straight home and don't go anywhere till after I get home. And he's like, what is the big deal? I was like, I'll tell you when I get home. I just knew he was going to get killed in a car crash. I knew. I just didn't know when. I was about 1 year and 7 months too early on that knowledge. And, you know, it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy for me to say it to you, but it's like God was kind of preparing. Don't know. But then again, I don't believe God made it happen. I won't know until I get there and he decides to tell me. And I don't really care then. I won't really care. But the biggest thing I can tell you is that even if you're going through something and you feel like God's a million miles away, he's still right there. Even when you can't pray. Because boy, I felt like he had left me. Even though I knew he hadn't. Felt like it. Right after Matthew died, I couldn't even pray. I got sick to my stomach wanting to pray. I didn't want to because it was like, I don't even want to talk to him right now. He could have made this stop. But that was me being human because God doesn't, you know, our plans are not his plans. And I don't think his plan was for Matthew to die then. But you know, if you read Job and I are like twins. I feel like I'm Job. I feel like we're in a sackcloth every day. But Job was, you know, the devil went to God and said, I want to test him. God said, you can test him, but don't kill him. I know how Job felt. We all know how Job feels at one time or another. We all have different things that go on in our lives. And I'm so glad they're different because I wouldn't want anybody to go through what I've had to go through. When I hear about another child in this county dying, I have to go to them. I don't know them, but I have to go. And it's like they're going to think I'm crazy because I show up at visitations. I don't know these people. And I give them a card with my number on it and just say, I'm Matthew's mom. Call me when you need to talk. Crazy. But it's an unspeakable bond that, you know, they're great people. I wish I'd met them under different circumstances. I have some really great friends now. But I wish that we hadn't become friends for the reason we became friends. So whenever you're going through things, you feel like God's a long way away. He's right behind you. You might not be able to see him, but all you have to do is call him. If you can't feel him, all you have to do is say, God, I need you. Because he'll show up. And it won't take 3 weeks or, you know, like when you order something on Amazon and you wait for it and it's not there and you're like, hurry up. Yeah, God's not like that. He's there the instant you call his name. And even if you call him and you don't feel him right away, he's still there. But we sometimes put things between us because we let our own feelings and our own wants, our own selfishness get in the way. And I have a friend who is in my group, Joni Panel. You know, she lost her Matthew. And her favorite thing is, you know, I've adopted from her is One Day Closer. And I'm not going to let anything keep me from heaven. So I guess until God chooses to let me, have that fun day I'm looking forward to, I guess I'll just have to be here and do whatever he tells me to. Sometimes I'm kind of resentful of that, but he knows that already, so it's okay to say that. I don't know what else to tell you. It's just, but he is there. You guys have any questions? I'm used to saying that one. I can do that. Yesterday was 3 years since I last saw Matthew, and tomorrow is 3 years since he died. Actually, what time is it right now?
6:57.
Okay. 7 hours till 3 years. 7 hours until he died 3 years ago. Yeah. I count it down to the second, and I don't know the exact time. I thought 2:04 for the longest time until they told me that the first 911 call came in at 2:04. Yeah. That's how, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. Just, there's a lot of things that are going on, and there's a lot of people that need help, and it's not going to get any better until we, and when I say we as Christians, I don't mean because I don't know you, but I've seen a lot of people who claim to be Christians that say things and do things and not meaning to hurt people, but they do. And sometimes the way we present ourselves to others is not in a favorable light toward God.